The night Edmund Vale robbed a grieving girl of the only thing she had left in this world, he had no idea that what was inside that small canvas bag would unravel 23 years of lies and cost him everything he thought he wanted. Rain came down hard on Halifax that Thursday evening, the kind of November rain that hits the pavement at an angle and soaks through a coat before a person even realizes what's happening. Edmund Vale stood beneath the awning of a dry cleaning shop on Barrington Street, collar turned up, watching the street the way men in his position always watched streets, not for anything in particular, just out of habit, out of survival. He was 41 years old and ran the most quietly efficient criminal operation in Atlantic Canada. No flashy cars, no nightclubs, no unnecessary noise. The Vale network moved through the maritime ports like water through cracks in old stone, invisible, inevitable, everywhere at once. Shipments of contraband passed through 3 provinces under his name, and not one police report in the last decade had mentioned him directly. That was the thing about Edmund. He was not the kind of man who got mentioned. His associate that evening, a broad-shouldered man named Garrett, who communicated mostly in shoulder movements, stood 2 steps behind him. They were waiting for a contact who was already 11 minutes late, which meant he wasn't coming. Edmund already knew this. He was simply giving the situation the courtesy of time. That was when he saw her. She came out of the little tea and lunch counter across the street. Mabel's, with its hand-painted sign and its window that always seemed slightly fogged from the inside. And she moved fast, head down, one arm clutching a canvas tote bag to her chest like it contained something she couldn't afford to lose. Which, Edmund would later understand, it absolutely did. She was maybe 22. Dark hair pulled back, uniform under her open jacket. She was clearly a waitress, probably just finished a closing shift. The way she moved told him she was preoccupied, that her mind was somewhere else entirely. She didn't see the 2 men who stepped out of the alley mouth ahead of her, and she didn't see the one who came up behind. Edmund didn't intervene. That was not his nature. He watched, professionally neutral, as the man behind her lifted the canvas bag off her shoulder in one clean motion, and the 3 of them disappeared around the corner of a side street before she'd even processed what had happened. She stopped walking. She stood in the rain. She looked at her empty hands. And then she made a sound, not a scream, not a cry, something quieter than either of those things. The kind of sound that comes from somewhere below the chest, from the place where a person keeps the things they can't say out loud. Edmund Vale moved before he decided to. He caught up with the 3 men in the alley before they'd gotten 30 feet. It took less than 90 seconds. Garrett, who had followed without being asked, retrieved the canvas bag from the pavement where it had landed. Edmund carried it back to the street. She was still standing where he'd left her, rain soaking through her jacket now. She looked at him with the particular wariness of a young woman who has learned that when one threat disappears, another usually fills the space. "Yours," he said, and held it out. She didn't take it immediately. She looked at the bag, then at him, then back at the bag. Then she said quietly, "Did you look inside?" He hadn't. He had no reason to. He shook his head. She took it from him, held it against her chest the same way she had before, and said, "Thank you," in a voice that told him she meant it, and that she hadn't expected it, and that this small, ordinary kindness was somehow the largest thing that had happened to her in some time. He nodded once. He walked away. He was half a block gone when Garrett appeared at his shoulder, with the information that the contact had, in fact, sent a message. Engine trouble outside Dartmouth, arriving in 40 minutes, which meant they had time to kill, and the nearest place to wait out of the rain was, by a narrow margin, Mabel's tea counter across the street. Edmund Vale sat in a corner booth, with a cup of black coffee and a view of the door, and 5 minutes later, the girl in the wet jacket walked in and tied on her apron, and went back behind the counter like nothing had happened. He watched her work. She moved efficiently, quietly, refilling the sugar dispensers and wiping down the counter with the same concentration she had given everything else. She didn't look up at him. It was only when she brought him a second coffee he hadn't asked for, setting it down without a word, already turning to go, that he saw her hands were still shaking. "You don't have to stay," he said. She stopped, looked at him. "I close tonight," she said. "My manager's sick." If I leave, nobody locks up. You could call someone. I could, she agreed, and went back to the counter. Her name, he saw when she turned to serve another customer, was stitched on her uniform in thread that was slightly unraveling at one end. Nora, just that. He stayed for the coffee. Then he stayed because the rain got worse. Then he stayed because Garrett came in with the news that the contact had been picked up at the provincial border for an unrelated matter, and the evening's business was finished, and at that point, there was nothing else to do but sit with the coffee and the rain on the window. At 10 past 10, the last customer left. Nora began turning chairs. Edmund stood, left money on the table, more than the coffee warranted, less than would seem strange, and put on his coat. I'll walk you out, he said. Not a question. She looked at him for a moment. There was something measuring in her expression, like she was doing a calculation that involved more variables than usual. Then she nodded. On the sidewalk, she locked the front door and turned up her collar against the rain. She had retrieved her canvas bag from behind the counter, and she held it the same way as before. You really didn't look? She said. No. She opened the bag and reached inside and took out something small. She held it toward him in the flat of her palm, and he leaned slightly to see it in the streetlight. It was a photograph, old, printed on the thick paper of an earlier era, slightly creased but carefully preserved in a small plastic sleeve. Two children standing in front of what appeared to be a long institutional building, a boy of perhaps 11, dark-haired, and a girl of 7 or so, both squinting into the sun. Someone had written on the back in faded ink, though he couldn't make out the words from where he stood. That's all that was in there, she said. The photo, and a letter, that's it, my whole evening bag. She paused. My wallet, my phone, my keys, those were in my locker. They didn't get those. But this, she looked down at it. This is what I was holding on to. He said nothing. Waited. My mother gave it to me last week, she said, before she died. She said the word died the way people say it when they've been practicing saying it out loud to get used to the shape of it. She said there was something I needed to know, something she'd been keeping for a long time. She said the letter explained everything. She put the photo back in the bag. She died before I could ask her any questions. Edmund stood in the rain for a moment. Then he said, What does the letter say? I haven't opened it yet. She looked up at him with an expression he could not fully decode. I don't know why I'm telling you this. You're a stranger. You're right, he said. You shouldn't tell me anything, and yet. She shifted the bag on her shoulder. My name's Nora Calloway, she said. I'm going to start walking now, and you're going to go wherever you were going. Nora Calloway, he repeated, and something moved in him. Something very old and very quiet, like a word in a language he'd half forgotten. He walked away. He did not sleep well that night. Now, before we go any further, if this is your first time at Ella's Romance Library, take a second and hit subscribe. Because the story of Edmund Vale and Nora Calloway is one of those ones that starts with a bag snatched in the rain and ends somewhere you will absolutely not see coming. Stay with me. The name. That was the thing. Edmund sat in the study of his house in the South End, a house that looked, from the outside, like every other century-old Halifax home on the street, and was, on the inside, the operational center of a great deal of activity that did not appear in any public record. And he turned the name over in his mind the way you'd turn a stone in your hand. Calloway. There had been a Calloway, once. A long time ago, in the part of his life that he did not discuss, that he had buried so efficiently under the weight of subsequent years, that it had become for him almost fictional. Almost. Patricia Calloway. That had been her name. A woman who had worked as a bookkeeper for his father's legitimate import business on the waterfront 30 years ago, when Edmund was a boy and the operation was run not by him but by a man named Victor Vale, who had been, by any reasonable measure, a significantly worse human being than his son. Patricia Calloway had been kind to Edmund in small ways. She brought him biscuits when he sat in the office waiting for his father. She taught him to play cribbage. She had a daughter, he thought, a small daughter who sometimes came to the office on early release school days and sat under the desk drawing horses on the backs of invoice sheets. Patricia Calloway had disappeared from his father's employment approximately 23 years ago. He had been 18. He had not thought of her in, he could not remember how long. He opened the secure terminal on his desk and typed a request to the man who handled his research needs. Then he poured 2 fingers of scotch he didn't touch and sat in the leather chair and waited. The answer came back in 4 hours. Patricia Calloway, née Morrison, born 1963, Truro, Nova Scotia. Employed by Harwich and Vale Import Limited, 1995 to 2001. One daughter, Nora Calloway, born 1999, Halifax. No father listed on the birth certificate. Patricia Calloway died November 4th of the current year, 12 days ago, at the QEII Health Sciences Center following a brief illness. She had worked in her final years as a church administrator in Dartmouth. No criminal record, no known associations. Nora Calloway, 24 years old, currently employed at Mabel's Lunch Counter, 847 Barrington Street. Currently residing on Maynard Street in the north end of Halifax. No father listed on the birth certificate. Edmund read that line a second time. Then he closed the terminal. He sat very still for a long time. His father's operation on the waterfront had ended badly. His father had ended badly, which is a story for another time. But there were records, and there were records, and some of them were not the kind that made their way into legal proceedings. Edmund had spent the first several years of his adult life carefully sorting through what his father had left behind, paying certain things off, burning others, building the version of the operation that had run under his name for the past 18 years. He knew what Victor Vale had been capable of. He knew the shape of it. He picked up his phone and called Garrett. "The girl from tonight," he said. "Nora Calloway. I need to know if anyone else is looking for her." They were. That was the discovery that arrived on Edmund's desk by the following afternoon, delivered by a careful man named Silas, who dealt exclusively in information and kept an office above a printing shop on Gottingen Street. 2 men had been asking questions in the north end of Halifax, asking specifically about Patricia Calloway and whether anyone knew if she had left anything behind. Documents, personal effects, letters. The men were not police. They were connected, through 4 or 5 degrees of careful intermediary, to a name Edmund recognized. A man called Rupert Ashdale, who had been his father's solicitor 40 years ago, and who should, by any reasonable actuarial assessment, have been dead by now but was apparently still operating out of an office in Fredericton. Rupert Ashdale, who had drawn up the legal structures through which Victor Vale had moved his money, who knew where the bodies, metaphorical and, Edmund had some reason to believe, otherwise, were buried, who would have very particular reasons to want to know whether Patricia Calloway had left any documentation behind, and who, if he found it first, would have very particular reasons to ensure that Nora Calloway never read it. Edmund was at Mabel's the next morning when it opened. Nora saw him sit down, brought him coffee without being asked, and said, "You looked me up." "Yes." She put the coffee down and crossed her arms, not defensively but in the way of someone deciding something. "And? Your mother worked for my father's company, 23 years ago." The color shifted slightly in her face. "You're a Vale, yes? Your father?" She stopped. "Your father was not a good man." "No," Edmund said. "He was not." She was quiet for a moment. 2 other customers came in. She went and served them with the automatic efficiency of someone who has learned to divide attention cleanly. When she came back, she said very quietly, "The letter. I read it last night." He waited. "My mother wrote it herself. She wrote it before she got too sick to hold a pen. She said that my father," she paused on the word, steady but careful, "that my father didn't abandon us. She said he didn't even know I existed. She said she left because she found out something about the business, something that frightened her. She said she went to a man called Ashdale to ask what she could do, and he told her to stay quiet and go, and she did." Nora looked at Edmund with calm, clear eyes. She said the proof of what she found was in the company's original ledger books, the ones from 2001, and she wrote down the name of who my father was. Edmund did not breathe. "She said his name was Victor Vale," Nora said. "Your father." The diner was warm and smelled of coffee grounds and toast. Outside, Halifax went about its morning, and Edmund Vale sat across from his half-sister for the first time in both their lives and tried to find something to say that was equal to the moment, and could not. "I need you to give me 3 days," he said finally. "For what?" "Ashdale's men are looking for your mother's letter, which means they're looking for you." Nora's expression did not collapse into fear, which he noted. It sharpened. Why? What does it mean for them if I have proof? The company's original books document how my father moved certain funds. Funds that Ashdale helped structure. Funds that are connected to things that, if they became known, would end Ashdale's career and his freedom, and quite possibly several other people's. He paused. Your mother spent 23 years protecting you from this knowledge. Ashdale wants to make sure she succeeded. Nora looked at him for a long time. Are you going to protect me? He said. Yes. She tilted her head slightly. Why? Because you are the only family I have left in this world. Because my father did this, and someone should stand in the place where he failed. Because you made a sound in the rain last night that I have not been able to stop hearing. He said, because it's the right thing to do. She studied him. Then she untied her apron, folded it, set it on the counter, and picked up her canvas bag. I get off at 3, she said. Where do I go? The 3 days that followed were not comfortable, but they were efficient. Edmund moved Nora to a house in Bedford, a quiet neighborhood where no one looked twice at anything. He posted 2 of his most reliable people, a woman named Viv, who had been with him for 11 years, and a quiet young man from Cape Breton named Dougal, to keep watch without being seen. He gave Nora his direct number and told her to use it without hesitation. She used it twice. Once to report that the man across the street from the Bedford house appeared to be watching the property, which was Dougal, so Edmund was able to put her mind at ease. And once at 11:30 at night, which he answered on the second ring, with his heart doing something it did not usually do, and she said, I found something else in the bag. Under the lining, there's an envelope I missed. He drove to Bedford. The envelope contained, in Patricia Calloway's careful hand, a single key and a handwritten note. The note said, Safe Deposit Box, Halifax Central Branch, TD Bank, Box 1147. The ledger pages are there, and one other thing which Nora should have, which she'll understand when she sees it. He sat across from Nora at the kitchen table in the Bedford house, and she held the key in her palm, and they looked at each other in the way of 2 people who are beginning to understand the actual dimensions of the thing that has happened to them. She planned this, Nora said. She knew she was sick. She planned all of this. She protected you, Edmund said. She protected both of us, Nora said, which he did not fully understand until the following morning. They went to the bank together. Edmund's solicitor, a careful woman named Mrs. Fahey, who had handled his legitimate affairs for 15 years, accompanied them. The box contained 12 pages of original ledger documents, photographed and notarized by someone Edmund didn't recognize. It contained a signed statement from Patricia Calloway, witnessed, dated 3 months ago, describing what she had found and what she had done and why, and it contained a photograph, different from the one in Nora's bag. This one was older. It showed a woman, young, dark-haired, serious, standing with a man outside the Harwich and Vale building on the waterfront. The woman was Patricia Calloway, 20 years younger. The man was Victor Vale. They were not standing the way that an employer and employee stand. Patricia had written on the back in the same careful hand, he was not all bad, at the beginning. I need Nora to know that. And I need Edmund to know that his father, whatever else he was, looked at the both of them like he loved them. Edmund's chest did something complicated. Nora read the back of the photograph twice. She put it down on the table between them, very gently, and then she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment, and Edmund looked away to give her the privacy of it. Mrs. Fahey handled the documentation with Rupert Ashdale's exposure that afternoon. A sealed package went to the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit by 4 o'clock. By 6, Ashdale's office had been contacted. By 8, Edmund received the information that Ashdale's men in Halifax had been recalled. It was over, quietly, efficiently, without noise, which is how Edmund Vale preferred things. What he did not prefer, and had not anticipated, was the conversation that happened afterward in the parking garage beneath the bank building, when Nora stopped walking and turned and said, What do we do now? He said. You can go home. You're safe. That's not what I asked. She looked at him in that direct way she had, the way that did not flinch. I asked what we do now, both of us. Edmund was not, as a rule, a man who was moved by things. He had spent most of his adult life engineering circumstances, so that movement, the unexpected kind, the kind that goes through you without your permission, did not have much opportunity to occur. He was good at this. He said, "I don't know." She nodded as though this were a reasonable answer, which it was not, except that it was honest, and she seemed to value honesty above most things. "I'm not going to pretend this is normal," she said. "Finding out your father was who he was. Finding out I have a brother." She paused slightly on the word, testing it. "Half-brother, half," he agreed. "But my mother left me a key," she said. "She could have destroyed the ledger pages. She could have let it all stay buried. She chose to give me this. Give us this." She looked at the canvas bag on her shoulder. "She wanted us to find each other." The parking garage was cold. Somewhere above them, Halifax was having a perfectly ordinary November evening. People finishing work, heading home, stopping for groceries, picking up children. All of it ordinary and continuous, and entirely unaware of the fact that Edmund Vale was standing in a concrete stairwell, having the truest conversation he had had in 20 years, with a 24-year-old waitress who was, apparently, his sister. "You're going to need a better job," he said finally. She looked startled. Then she laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprises the person producing it. "That is the most unromantic response to this moment that I can possibly imagine." "I don't mean," he paused, "the ledger. If you're willing to testify, the documentation of what my father did could also." He stopped again. Then, with the unfamiliar sensation of someone who has not done something in a long time and is doing it anyway. "I own 3 legitimate businesses. I need someone I trust in a financial oversight position. I have been looking for that person for 4 years. Nora was quiet for a moment. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a place," he said. "Those are different things." She looked at him. He could not read her expression entirely, and he had spent his life reading expressions. Then she said, "My mother taught me cribbage." He said, "I know. She taught me first." And the thing that shifted in him then, the click of recognition, the sense of something long misplaced returning to the hand that lost it. That was the moment Edmund Vale understood what his mother had meant. Years ago, when she'd told him that you cannot choose family, and you cannot undo it, and you cannot know, until it finds you, how much of yourself has been waiting in the gap it left. He didn't change everything overnight. That would make a better story, maybe, but it wouldn't be true. The legitimate businesses had always been his hedge, his long plan, the shape of the life he'd intended before the weight of what his father built pressed down on him at 18. And he made choices that compound over decades. Unwinding those choices takes longer than 3 days and a parking garage conversation. But he started. He started because there was now someone who knew where he'd come from, and who had no reason to let him coast. Nora Calloway, it turned out, was extraordinarily difficult to lie to, not because she caught him in lies, but because when he told her the truth, her response was always so straightforwardly decent that lying felt like a poor use of everyone's time. She started the financial oversight role in January. Mrs. Fahey vouched for her credentials and helped with the proper channels. The first week, Nora found 3 bookkeeping inconsistencies that Edmund's previous accountant had missed for 7 years. She left a note on his desk about each one. The notes were polite and factually devastating. He framed the third one. He did not tell her this. They had dinner on Sunday evenings. At first, because it seemed like a practical way to discuss the business week, and then because it became the thing they did, and neither of them brought it up directly, because some arrangements are clearest when left unspoken. He told her one evening in February about what his father had been. Not the summary version, the full version. He had never told anyone the full version. She listened without interrupting, which was something she was very good at. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You've been carrying that for a long time." "Yes. You can put it down now," she said. "You have somewhere to put it." Outside, the harbor was dark and Halifax was cold in the way that only February in Nova Scotia is cold. Penetrating, final feeling, almost personal. And Edmund Vale sat at a dinner table with someone who knew the worst of where he came from and had not left. And for the first time in a very long time, the cold felt like weather rather than a condition. The photograph from Nora's canvas bag, the 2 children in front of the institutional building, the girl squinting into the sun, sits now in a frame on the mantel of Edmund's South End house. He had it enlarged carefully so the details are visible. The building is St. Agatha's Community Center, where his father had apparently sent Patricia on one occasion to drop off a charitable donation. And she had brought Nora, and Nora had found a boy sitting alone on the front steps who wouldn't tell her his name, and she had sat down next to him anyway, and someone had taken the photograph. He was 11. She was 7 months old. He doesn't remember the day. She doesn't remember it either, obviously. But Patricia Calloway remembered, and she kept it for 23 years. And when she knew she was dying, she made sure that the two children in that photograph would find their way to each other. Sometimes the thing you lost isn't lost. Sometimes it has been waiting, in a canvas bag, in the rain, for someone to come along and hand it back. So here's what I want to ask you before you go. If you were Nora, if you opened that bag and found not money, not a phone, but a key and a photograph and a letter that changed everything you thought you knew about who you are, would you have opened it sooner? Or would you have held it the way she did, for days, because some truths need time before you're ready to let them in? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story stayed with you the way it stayed with me, you know what to do. Leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one.